We're going to take a look at Tom Russell's Westphalia. Funny thing here, I was just loading up my last little video and responding to some of the comments and everything, and I noticed that No Enemies Here had Tom on live cast on YouTube. And so I'm kind of torn between, do I want to listen to that? And I had been, but I'm like, I have to get this played. I have to start this, and it's Sunday, and, you know, I blew off shopping because of my foot, but yeah. Anyway, so my, let me close the door because my wife might come up and she gets scared away if I'm filming. I ran into this game, I saw it on Board Game Geek and said, what an interesting topic. Because it's about the peace of Westphalia and maneuvering militarily, politically, etc., in a way to win the peace. You know, some people say Empires in Arms is a peace game. This really is a peace game. This is about the peace conference, but you do things outside the peace conference for the most part. It's just, you know, positioning yourself for that conference. But the conferences are underway. And that just excited me so much. And then I looked at it and said, fuck, it looks like a Euro. You know? And I've looked at there's a couple of other Hollandspiel game designs that I felt have gone a little too light. Whereas others feel pretty good, you know. So I just kind of had I'm not sure. And then I noticed Kevin Sharp, Hipshot, posted a comment over on Facebook that he had just played this, threw a picture of it up, and that it was a ton of fun. And I was kind of like, okay, I think, you know, it's not like I trust Kevin's taste in everything as aligning with mine, but if he's looking at something that I'm afraid is too Euro-ish and has a blast with it, I kind of had to, it became the tipping point to sell me. So, you know, it's just how the community works, etc. I am sure that Tom has a good introduction video on this. He, in fact, has a how to kind of explain the game section. You read the rules first, and then he has sort of a short version to give you a quick intro to it. So if you want to learn, it's probably easier to learn from him than from my method, but for those of you who are used to mine, I'm going to go into the full situation here. So first, let's look at some of the components that we have kicking around on the board. Well, on the table. And you can see I've got this on my small table, so it's kind of a tight fit, but it's still a nice little sized game. You can, you know, you can play this in a lot of different circumstances because it's small. And it's not that long either. This is the extent of the turns involved. Some nice component qualities, and as I mentioned on the live cast, it smells great. Apparently they're not really thrilled with it, but the way the counters are printed with the laser printing and then the cutter, it just has that wonderful smell, very much like Victory Point Games laser cut counters did. And the difference here being you don't have to wipe these clean. Somebody's already cleaned that up. Blue Panther does the printing, but good quality overall. From, you know, the cards obviously really nice quality. Everybody can print good cards nowadays. Nobody has to deal with those damn Avalon Hill rip out ones or the SPI ones for that matter. So let's look what we have. Each player has a little player aid card, which gives the final scoring information on it, as well as the starting position and the victory conditions for the game. And the victory conditions are a little weird. This is a game that can only be played in 6 players. Now, obviously, I'm going to play it solo, but and I already have actually, and had a blast doing it then too. And we'll see how much it holds up for a second playing, where I've learned a little bit, but I don't want to analyze the end game too much, which is one of maybe my flaws. I will not be good at this ever because I kind of don't want to put that effort in, at least in solo play. I might be able to do those calculations when I'm playing it opposed. Anyway, each player has their own little player card. Those are dealt out at the beginning of the game, and then you're allowed to trade them. And you're allowed to trade them in exchange with, some of your starting position. Basically, this is a game in which you can trade anything and everything. Within the game, at least. But the scope of what's in the game for trade is pretty damn large. And there are some things you can do that may seem a little, cheap because it's so open. But I like that. I think that's cool. These little cubes, those are your military forces. For the Dutch, they represent both armies and navies. For most of the powers, they represent the actual armies that are, the companies or whatever you want to call within the armies, which are these big dudes. And for the French, they're a little special case because they actually have two separate armies, so they have to split theirs up, one side of the card or the other or whatever. These are very important. These are your debt. You don't want debt. You start with it. In almost every case, debt is how you lose the game, and you're going to be trying to retire that debt either by trading it away to someone, and they don't want it, or by accumulating things that allow you to eliminate your debt at the end of the game. Basically, eliminate the penalty of that debt. So if you gain territories, etc., you're in a stronger bargaining position, and that debt is less harmful to you. You will be gaining debt every time you go through a diplomacy turn, and you'll be gaining it based on one of these, this card. Everybody's got a copy of that card, essentially, where there's a combination of your current debt and these markers, which are your prestige. You do want prestige. Prestige is great. It will help you retire debt at the end of the game. It helps you get less debt throughout the game. So it's pretty much the best thing you can have. And Spain, who is horribly in debt, is able to hide that debt because of their prestige. Basically, everybody thinks they're so great, so nobody realizes just how close to bankruptcy they really are. Except the bankers, who absolutely know and just keep giving them more debt because they don't have any other option, really. Okay. So what else do we have? We have the board itself, which is sort of a standard area representation. There's a little inset over here for the Netherlands, and a few tracks. An initiative track, which is going to indicate who goes where during the military maneuver phase, and you're allowed to trade your position on the initiative track with someone else. You cannot trade away the time of the game. You can't trade away the turn structure. You have liberties and tolerances tracks. The liberties are how free from the Holy Roman Empire, essentially, the various smaller participants in the empire are, how much control Austria really has over the empire. Now, they start out pretty damn strong. Certainly at the beginning of the 30 Years' War they weren't, but they did increase their strength quite a bit over the empire and their control of it. But they never, I don't think that it was ever a position that was sort of maximal control of the empire. I consider it as sort of a solid kingdom or something. So I don't think the 0 point reflects that. It reflects something probably stronger than ended up, but not the situation of sort of a homogenous empire. The tolerance is going to be the religious tolerance. This is essentially toleration of Protestantism. The map itself, well, it's divided into color groups. Color group for the Netherlands, fine. But the Catholic areas are pink. The Protestant areas are kind of this tan color. There's circles in each area, which are the number of, I don't know, we're going to call them points. The number of provinces, whatever, provincial points, anything you want to call it, the game has a specific term for it, that particular area has. And each point you have is worth some debt reduction. But also on top of that, controlling multi-point areas is important for debt reduction as well. So if you control all the points in a multi-point area, you get kind of a bonus. Let's take a look at the symbols on the map. There aren't a lot. The big shield, and you'll see there's a big shield here. It's a little different. That indicates that the other side cannot enter that area. Only the side that the shield is in can enter it. Now, the Netherlands and France are always allied in this game, so they're allowed to both enter Antwerp for whatever value that is. The little shield, like this, indicates that's where an army starts. So here you've got a big shield with a little shield in it, blah, blah, blah. You can see some areas like Austria do not have any victory point spaces. You know, that kind of doesn't mean anything. You can't control it, but no one can go into it because of the big shield. Anything else here that I have not yet noted? Yeah, these yellow markers, when Bavaria completely controls a Protestant area, they can convert it back to Catholicism, and that causes one of those to be put on the map. It also causes tolerance to go down, and it turns the area into a Catholic area, which has some impact on the game. We've got some card sets here. The first of the card sets that I'm going to describe is this. This is the Habsburg victory conditions. Everybody else's victory conditions is known, but the Habsburgs have secret victory conditions. There are 6 cards, and they're variations on these 3 values. The territory threshold, that's how many that's the word for these circles, territories. How many territories that you actually control. Now, at the beginning of the game, they control quite a bit. They control every single one that's empty. Anywhere, but they can't turn empty there. So they have well over the 14 that they need, which means they have a capacity in this game of trading away quite a bit of territory. I think they're always willing to trade away quite a bit of territory, but I haven't studied the cards. We can look at them later, after the game. The authoritarian threshold, that's going to be the combination of liberties and tolerance. So right now that's 3 plus 0. I have 3 more authoritarian levels that I could give up without losing the game, is essentially what it is. And I'll explain the victory conditions in a little bit. And then the debt threshold, well, that's a crappy 12. I only have 11 now. But here's the thing. Debt is the one thing that you can't be absolutely certain of what your debt is going to be at the end of the game. Now, you can mostly calculate it in the last turn or so, how much debt you're going to end up with. There is some randomness, though. You end up rolling dice and gaining debt based on the dice that are rolled, and everybody gains it. It's all the same amount. It just means that you can't absolutely assure that you're going to be in a good position or in a winning position based on what you can see. You cannot absolutely calculate the victory conditions. Although if you're doing well enough, you can essentially do so. You can say, I can't possibly roll that much debt. I will win this game. Okay. Multiple people can win the game, though. And there's no tie-breaking. In fact, for certain powers, Austria and France, the leaders of the coalitions, multiple people must win the game if they're going to win. In a sense, I kind of see their victory as more important as the more major power, because they cannot win alone in any sort of sense. It's not a big deal, though. But they are the ones who are going to be emerging from the conference, if they're the winner, or if they're a winner, in a really powerful position. Both Austria and France cannot win the game together, because if everybody wins, and that's the only way that the 2 of them would be allowed to win, then only one player will win, and that's determined by sort of a points comparison at the end of the game. So if everybody ends up winning, only one person wins, but otherwise multiple people will possibly win the game. And it's also possible that no one will win. Too bad. Okay. Let's look at the sequence of play. And I will try to catch the rules without paging through them, but they're well done. It was very easy to understand. I was just able to kind of read it and get the game. Oh, I haven't gone over all the cards. Okay. So this is the victory conditions for the Austrians. This card indicates some special cases where tolerance is adjusted. This is kind of a hard little set of special rules, and we'll touch on those a little later. This is the card that tells you how much debt you obtain each turn based on your prestige and the current amount of debt you have. And it is actually possible that you get none if you have tons of prestige and no debt. We probably will not see that. On the back side of this one is how debt is reduced and resolved at the end of the game. Basically, a bunch of different factors can be added together, can be factored in to remove your debt. And some of those factors count twice. They count to remove debt, and then they count towards your specific victory conditions on top of that, which is pretty cool. This is a set of unrest type cards. France and Sweden have the option to trigger Protestant, essentially, and liberal unrest within the empire. And by paying a certain cost, they can cause bad things to happen to the Catholic and imperial side of things. We'll hit that in a moment. Okay, first thing is determine initiative. This is done randomly. These can all be thrown in a cup or whatever and drawn out one at a time. I'll probably be using dice because I don't want to bring one of my cups down just for this. I find it easy enough to randomize. And that's going to be the sequence of play between the various players. Now, during the diplomacy phase, during the entire length of it, you are allowed to trade stuff. And there's a list of stuff you can trade, and it's pretty much everything. Your soul. See if I can find it here. You can trade units. That's what these are called. I don't think you can trade units out of the Dutch sea box. There's a couple of places where the rules aren't really specific, and I'm kind of like, you probably shouldn't be allowed to. You can trade your debt. You don't want it, nobody else does. You can trade your prestige. You want it, everybody else does. You can trade claims. You just exchange one of your colored discs for one that another player has. Now, you can see Spain has almost all their claims on the board, so they're not going to be able to get much. Essentially, they're allowed to get Brabant. That's it. So, I don't know what it would do to start putting Spanish claims over here. It doesn't do Spain any good. It uses up one of their tokens. They don't want to do it, but there doesn't seem to be anything that disallows it. It's certainly not something they want. It would be a negative factor to them. You can trade commerce. Hey, that's something I didn't explain. So the last set of cards here is the commerce cards. The Dutch draw those, and based on certain factors, and then they want to get them into other people's hands. Each commerce card that another person has reduces their debt at the end of the game by that much. The sum of the commerce cards that all other players have reduces the Dutch debt. There is one proviso, though. The Dutch can only count one commerce card, the highest one, from any given player. So they don't really want to get 2 to 1 player, but other players would like a second one and might be willing to take some debt on for it, for example. Okay. Cessation of hostilities. The Spanish and Dutch are able to cut a deal and say, we're not at war anymore. And that does a couple of things. It affects Dutch commerce, it affects the Spanish gold money coming in, and the Dutch army goes away, and I believe the Spanish aren't allowed to take Dutch territory spots anymore. The French and Spanish will remain at war in the Netherlands, though, under those conditions. You can trade away turn order on the initiative track. You can basically swap places with someone. And you could work out a 3-way deal or something to do that. And it's not necessarily to your advantage to go first or last. Like, one is not always to your advantage. Sometimes you want to go first because there are certain advantages to going first, especially for the Bavarians. They're able to convert territories at the beginning of their military phase. So they might want to go early, get that conversion in. In other cases, it probably behooves you to go late in the military phase. And you can trade the tolerance and liberties. Those are under special rules. Austria controls tolerance and liberty. They're the ones who have to agree to relax it as a trade. It can be changed in other ways, such as from these cards and through military action. In order to relax it, in order to change the tolerance or liberties, they have to get an agreement from another player. In the case of liberties, either Bavaria or Sweden has to agree, and usually either one will agree if they are increasing the liberties. Neither one particularly wants to lower the liberties and is going to want something in exchange for that. In terms of tolerance, similar situations, Sweden and the Dutch, they both are in favor of tolerance. The Swedes especially so. The Dutch are a little bit like, maybe I don't care so much. However, the Dutch and the Austrians don't have too much in common that they're interested in. The commerce cards, debt. I mean, okay, so all the little pieces that are in the game they're interested in, but they're not really interested in territory comparisons. However, the Austrians might be able to work out a deal between Spain and the Dutch, and it may involve tolerance going down, which is not that horrible a thing for the Dutch. It's a pretty bad thing for the Swedes. Liberties, both Sweden and Bavaria, are very interested. The Dutch don't particularly want to see the tolerance move down. They're just less concerned about it than the Protestant powers in the other situations. Okay, so that's the first thing you do. And again, you can cut deals at any point here. Although any action that kind of is taken is done. So let's talk a little bit about deals. Along with things that you're trading that are actually game state, you can also make promises. If the promise is for the current diplomatic phase or the upcoming military phase, it's a binding promise. Anything beyond that is not. And it's just an agreement. Okay. The next thing is arrears. You're able to take on debt. Well, you end up taking on debt as per this table. And it's pretty simple. You count the number of prestige markers you have, say 2, the amount of debt, say 8. So I compare 2 to 8. I would be gaining 2 more debt. It might behoove me to trade away some of my debt in order to get to a lower table, or to gain some prestige in order to get on a better table. And so that's an interesting point at which people might trade. I find it hard playing solo to determine all the points where trades might start happening. And quite often it kind of happens towards the end of the diplomacy phase the last time I was playing. But I think more and more trades will happen the more people get used to the game. Jumping in with, hey, I really need to get this fixed. And if I get this fixed now, it's worth more to me. So how about, if I give you a deal right now? One important thing, you can't trade once you're in the military phase. No trades whatsoever. You could presumably make non-binding agreements for whatever that's worth. The game is agnostic about that in the rules. Okay. So everybody gets their new debt. Then everybody gets additional units. That is marked here. And each power has a different... Yeah, that is marked there. Each power has a different quantity. France has the largest, but they have 2 armies on the board. So the richest in troops is often Bavaria with +4 and only 1 army, and maybe not a lot that they have to do with it, although they do have some interesting things to do with it. So it's quite often the case that Bavaria might be able to loan troops to someone else, or not loan, give. Giving troops doesn't necessarily mean national troops. It could be resources that allow you to get troops. It could be mercenary companies, whatever you want to call it. It's just these these countries have more access. The Austrians have very, very little access to troops and are often troop poor. Now, they're in they're in pretty close to the same situation as the Austrians are in terms of what they want their troops for. They're in the same field of the map. They have one army. They're facing Sweden and France, whatever. Yet, they have a little bit less demand in terms of how they play the game, probably, where they're really, really interested in getting the troops in terms of really needing the troops. However, they may be willing to trade them. And troops, like everything else, at the end of the game are actually valuable to you towards reducing debt, strangely enough. That's a little bit of a weirdness. Okay. At this point, the Dutch are allowed to put some of their units into the Dutch sea box. Up to 6. And that's going to affect some of the other factors coming forward. Okay. For armies, you can only have a maximum of 8 units in any one army. If you have more than that at this point, you have to get rid of them, which means you have something to trade away that doesn't really matter to you. Often Bavaria's case, I found, that other people have some interest in getting and might be willing to give you something in exchange for. For example, the Dutch might well say, hey, Bavaria, give me a unit or two, and I'll give you one of these right away. That helps the Dutch, it helps the Bavarians, and the troops going over may not be that valuable to anyone else. Just, a heads up on as to things that might be valuable in exchanges. All right, roll for Italy. You roll 2 dice. If you get doubles, you re-roll. And the game comes with 2 dice. If you don't get doubles, the lower valued number that's on there is the cost of the war in Italy. First, the Spanish have to get rid of a number of units equal to that cost or assume debt equal to the units that they don't lose. Then the French have to do the same thing. And again, both players have their own choice whether to choose debt or units. Then Spain rolls for gold. They roll a die. If it's greater than the number of ships the Dutch have in the sea box, they get 1 prestige. Otherwise, they get 2 debt. However, once the Dutch and Spanish are at peace, that will always be successful and give a prestige to the Spaniards. So the Spanish want this war over with as soon as they can get it, for this reason only, because prestige is really valuable. How about the Dutch? Well, they have a roll for trade. They roll a die. If it's less than or equal to the number of ships, they get a commerce card. However, if they're at peace with Spain, they get 2 commerce cards. Now, I'm not sure if I read that right. I believe they have to put their ships there anyway. Yeah. So they have to succeed in their ship roll. So having 6 ships in here is very valuable if there's no war. Something of a bonus to the Dutch. The problem is, in that roll for trade, as soon as that phase is done, half of your ships get removed. So you're going to have to keep replenishing your ships. If you have 6 in here, you lose half. You lost 3 of your ships. You only replace 2 each turn. So you're not going to have all your ships in there for the whole game unless you're able to make deals. Unrest, France and Sweden. That's these cards. France and Sweden between them decide to flip 0, 1, or 2 cards. Each card that they choose before they do anything to flip, I'll lose them 1 unit each. Then, that card has some information on it, including an amount of debt that you can spend to trigger the event. And any player on the game is allowed to increase, to pay the debt. And if no other player takes the debt, then Austria has the option to reverse that sort of Protestant and liberty aligned card in the other direction by taking on the debt. And I forgot about that when I played last time, but yeah. So flipping those cards over, if you're not willing to take the debt, first of all, it's going to cost you troops. Secondly, it's not such a great thing. Okay. And then we hit the final step, and this is actually when the troops, when you have to allocate, you have to make your maximum of 8 units per army. You allocate your forces, and at this point, you're done with negotiations. I have to pause in order to swap batteries. Okay, so the military portion of the game is the next step. After you do a diplomacy phase, you go to a military, and so on until the last diplomacy phase. Then you go to the final conditions, where you determine who won. And again, I find it kind of interesting not to pre-calculate too much at that final diplomacy step. You could really optimize your chances of victory at that point. But this feels like a game where you just kind of want to play by feel. I don't know. It depends on what kind of player you are. All right, so let's take a look. The military phase is actually pretty damn simple, assuming I'm getting it right. What you're allowed to do is move through territory that's aligned with you. And territory that's not as well, although that can cause issues. That allows additional options. So what you're allowed to do is move from one area to an adjacent area as much as you like. At some point or another, you may enter an area that has an opposing faction. And the two factions are basically the pro-French, which includes the Protestant powers, the Dutch and the Swedes, and the pro-Austrians, which includes the Catholic powers of Spain and Bavaria. And at that point, you have the option to say you're going to stop there and you're going to try to replace the circle there. So say France is moving to here and I want to take the Rhenish Palatinate. I can just do that essentially. But in announcing that and it's going to cost me one of my units to put a little French disc there. But in announcing it, before I spend my unit, any Catholic player, any of my opponents, has the opportunity, if they're on that map, to intercept me. In order to intercept, they have to transit through only friendly territory. They reach me, and they become the attacker in a battle. Okay? And if the French win the battle, then they can continue on with their replacing that. However, any interception that happens causes a possible battle, and it causes that army to stop, whether it wins or not. So it may behoove you to try to collect up things where you're not going to be intercepted before you go to be intercepted. The problem with that is, each time you put a disc on the board, you spend one of your units, and your army becomes weaker. Okay. Now, when you're intercepted, you're the defender, so you end up having the opportunity to withdraw from combat. That negates your capability to put a disc there, but it also makes it so you don't lose a battle that you might otherwise lose. Another opportunity is, let's say I wanted to move my French. I go through here, 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 here. I'm not really stopping to capture any territories there, and then I move it. Well, I can't move in here because Bavaria, this is a home area, and you can't ever enter those if you're opposed. But I move into here, and I'm attacking the Bavarian army directly. Now, the French are the attacker. That allows the Bavarians to withdraw before combat. And, I'm not sure if that stops the French if they're withdrawn from. Yes, it does. Yes. If you enter into a battle situation and declare that you're attacking, well, you automatically declare that you're attacking, that will stop your army. So basically there can be one combat on each front. Now, the French are a little special. When their turn comes up, they get two different armies. If they move one army, the other one will still be available to be moved unless the first army loses a battle. So you kind of have to assess where you want to do your activities, which is more important to get activities done, and you can't switch back and forth between the armies. So you have to complete one army. So you can't like use one while it's strong and then pause over, go to the other one, and then come back to the risky attack or whatever. Okay, the battle itself is going to be handled if neither side withdraws, and when you withdraw to friendly territory. The defender has to go to an adjacent friendly area. If there is no such adjacent friendly area, they cannot refuse the battle. They must fight. Okay, in order to fight, the attacking army will get the number of units plus the sum of 2 dice. The defending army will get double the number of units that they have, which means at a certain size, an army of size 8, if two armies of size 8 are facing each other, the attacker's actually at a disadvantage, but quite often the attacker's 2 dice give them an advantage over the extra bonus that the defender's going to have if armies are a little smaller than full-sized. Okay. You add up the sum, and if the attacker is greater than the defender's total strength, the attacker will win the battle. Otherwise, the defender will win, with one exception, well, a pretty big one, which is if you roll doubles. Any doubles, the attacker loses the battle in a terrible way. This is the cost to being the attacker. Even if you have overwhelming odds, you can get smashed by this. Now, if it's doubles, only the attacker loses a number of units equal to the dice that, whatever the die roll was for one of the dice. So in this case, it would be 6 losses, which is pretty damn big. In any other case, both armies lose a number of units equal to the smaller of the 2 die rolls. That does not affect who won the battle. You can be wiped out and win the battle, which I find a little weird. The loser is going to have to retreat into a friendly area not occupied by the enemy through adjacent friendly areas. They may only pass through non-friendly areas if there's no other path to their chosen friendly destination. Each such area they retreat through loses them an additional unit. So that's basically the mechanism for the combat. Fairly simple, fairly abstract. This is not a war game. This is a peace game. Like I mentioned before, if the Bavarians, if their initiative comes up and they're sitting in an area, well, they don't have to be sitting in. If they have an area which they fully control all the territories in, that is Protestant, they get to put one of these little Catholic markers on there. That has a couple of implications. It will permanently be Catholic, even if Bavaria ends up losing its territories there. The moment it's recatholicized, the tolerance goes down by 1, which is fine for the Bavarians, fine for the Austrians, not so good for the Swedes. Okay. All right, so Spain can't actually own territories in the Holy Roman Empire. So that thing I was talking about, that can't happen. You can't force them to take territories there. You can only have territories on the maps that you belong on. We've already kind of talked about the tolerance and liberties track. They can be moved by these, by negotiation with a minor partner, and finally by Protestants winning battles. When Protestants win battles, I believe the tolerance goes up. Trying to see this. Each participant, okay, missed a couple of things on the armies. Whoever wins the battle, okay, if you lose a battle, you lose a prestige marker if you have one. If you win a battle, you gain a prestige marker if there's one available. Everything's limited by the countermix. I don't know about that. That probably isn't, but good luck if you wipe out that much. And then if a Protestant power, the Swedes or the Dutch, win a battle, tolerance goes up by 1, which is obviously very bad for the Austrians and the Bavarians. Okay. We talked about the the Spanish and Dutch Republic peace, which can be negotiated. And this will affect the gold and trading steps over here. Once the truce is in play, you may make a binding agreement not to attack each other, a temporary truce with any powers, and if you do that, it is binding for that next military phase, which includes attacking, intercepting, and converting claims. None of that can happen. Okay, the end of the game. And yeah, I sort of start blundering here because I'm really comfortable with this period, but the military stage of the game is not particularly complicated, but it's like the special cases don't happen that much. Okay, not that much combat happens, to tell you the truth. Okay, after the 4th diplomacy phase, you go to this resolve debt and check victory. First thing you do is fluctuation. Austria rolls 2 dice, and each player gets debt equal to the lower of the 2 dice. If there's doubles, no additional debt is accrued. And this is the randomizer. Otherwise, people could calculate whether or not they can win the game. Then, everybody other than the Dutch Republic loses debt equal to the amount of any commerce cards they have, and the Dutch reduce debt by the sum of the commerce cards in possession of other players, but no more than 1 per player. So they want to get those cards divvied up. Then we get to the taxation, which is what your claims are worth. Sweden and Bavaria lose debt equal to the number of points of territory that they personally possess in the Holy Roman Empire. Sweden only gets Protestant territories, Bavaria only Catholic ones, and each player reduces their debt by an additional 1 debt if they possess all the territories in one region. So if Sweden had another disc over here, this would be worth 1, 2, 3 debt reduction. Good reason to consolidate your holdings. Initially, nobody's got any multi-territory except Austria. Okay. Austria reduces its debt by the number of areas in the Holy Roman Empire that do not have any Swedish, French, or Bavarian claims. France reduces its debt by the number of areas in the Holy Roman Empire that do possess Swedish, French, or Bavarian claims. They just want to see Austria downed. Okay, now to the Netherlands. The Dutch reduce their debts by the number of points of territory that they personally possess. Right now, 1, and that can't easily be taken away from them. I guess they could trade it to someone. Trade their own existence away. No one can take that from them. The Spanish would be allowed to take it because they're opposed. The French are not opposed to the Dutch, so they're in an alliance, so they can't take it. But the Spanish aren't allowed to move in here because it's Big Shield. But the Dutch could trade away their existence if they so desired. And that sounds like a really horrible idea. Okay. Spain and France compare how many discs they have in the Netherlands. Whichever side has more, and the French count the Dutch territory in this case, whichever side has more territories, more claim markers, will reduce their debt by 5, and the other side gets nothing. If it's a tie, the French get the bonus. Then you count your remaining units, including ships, and divide it by 2, rounding up, and you reduce your debt by that. You reduce your debt by the amount of prestige you can control. Sweden reduces its debt by the tolerance and liberties track total. The Dutch reduce their debt by the amount on the tolerance track. It does matter to them, but you'll see it affects Sweden more when we look at the actual victory conditions. And Bavaria reduces its debt by the position on the liberties track and by the number of Catholicized territories that they've made on the board, which has a limit based on countermix. Okay. At this point, you determine who has won the game. Which players? It's more than one, possibly. Very likely. For the Bavarians, they have to meet 2 statuses. The liberties has to be greater than the tolerance. So they actually want that tolerance low. And the sum of the liberties track and Bavarian claims has to be greater than Bavaria's total debt, which has just been reduced greatly. Spain's only victory condition is to get their debt below 25. Now, they start with 20, and this card says they're going to gain quite a bit. If you have 20 debt, I don't care how much prestige you have, you're going to be gaining some debt. And then there's random debt at the beginning of the game. But they could survive it. Austria has to has to not exceed the thresholds on their card. Remember how these are worded. So their territory threshold, that number of territories controlled by others or territories that they control. I may have been misreading that and counting it as territories they control. Either way, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, they still have a fair amount. I think it's territories that other people control because they can't exceed it. The authoritarian can be kind of hard, and of course the debt threshold, ouch. Okay. So they have to keep a fair number of empty spaces here. If they exceed any of these, they can't win. But in addition, both Bavaria and Spain have to win the game for Austria to win. They cannot win unless their allies win the game as well. Okay, moving on to the other side. And that's why, Austria cannot win the game unless 2 other players are winning it, except in the special case where everybody wins, in which case they still had to make sure that their 2 allies make their victory conditions. This is sort of the hammer that the lesser powers have over their, major power. Okay, for the Dutch, the number of Dutch trading agreements has to be greater than the amount of Dutch debt. Those Dutch trading agreements have already been counted to reduce. Oh, it's only the lowest valued card that the other player has. Yeah, I thought it was highest. So these Dutch trading agreements count twice for the Dutch, essentially. They are the victory conditions as well. For Sweden, the tolerance and Swedish claims added together, liberties don't matter, just tolerance, have to be greater than Sweden's debt. So liberties matter less to Sweden than they do to Bavaria. For France has to be less than 20 debt total, and the Dutch and Swedes have to have won. They have to have met their victory conditions. Okay, well, if everybody wins, then there's a special scoring to take place, which you get negative victory points equal to your current debts, and you get collective achievements. Catholics get 1 for each Catholic area in the Holy Roman Empire, including the recatholicized. Catholic powers score negative VP equal to the current position of tolerance, plus the number of areas containing Swedish or Dutch claim markers. The Catholic powers include France, even though it's allied with the Dutch and the Swedes. For the Protestant powers, which is really just the Dutch and Swedes, they get victory points equal to their current position of the tolerance track. Sorry, up there. Each major power scores 1 victory point for each of these unrest cards that are remaining in the deck. Now, the major powers are France, Spain, Austria, and Sweden. They do not want too much unrest to have been played out. Now, France and Sweden are the ones who control how many of those cards come out, get played. The minor powers score victory points equal to how far the Liberties track is. Those are the non-major powers. The Holy Roman Empire powers get victory points equal to the amount indicated on Austria's goal card. Oh, what the hell? Austria, Bavaria, and Sweden. That is this number here. So that's what that is. I thought it was just the number of the card, you know, like an indication. Yeah. Okay, that's interesting. And then whoever has the highest positive score wins the game, or the smallest absolute negative. And ties go to whoever is closest to first on the initiative track among that. The time I played, I don't remember who won. I know that the Austrians won, so all of the sort of pro-Catholic powers had to win. Spain and otherwise. I think the Dutch were winners, and Sweden was unable to win, which prevented France from winning. Had Sweden won, we would have gone into that sudden death, you know, calculate out by victory points. So that's the idea. That's most of the rules of the game kind of spelled out. It's not a complicated game. I have a little bit of struggling with some of the more procedural aspects of it. Just, you know, they're not as memorized. I really do like the concept of this very open trading going on, but that's hard to cope with. This is only a 6-player game. I will be playing it solitaire, given that it's really almost driven by the negotiations. It's almost like playing diplomacy solo. But I find it a lot easier. Like, I'm making decisions almost in that opportunistic, I can look at the board state and figure out what the hell I want to do. And including trades, and both players can kind of make it. I almost never had to resort to dice for my trading decisions, my negotiations, etc. I felt like everybody was sort of clear on what kind of trades they were willing to do and everything, but a little bit of randomness in the game was able to spark that. Clearly, as I play it more, I'll probably feel more willing to explore in the solo. But this is not a game that I'd suggest to anybody to pick up to play solo, although that is pretty much why I'm doing it, because the chances of me getting 6 people together to play something that takes a few hours, pretty low at this point. Much as I would love to play this in an opposed framework, but yeah, it definitely does give me a kick as a solo game. So, and like I said, you know, the idea had always intrigued me. I wanted to stay away from it, but Hipchat's recommendation that it was fun was enough to convince me that whatever it is that was bothering me and worrying me about it, I would enjoy this game. I would enjoy it a lot. And so far, in my one play, it has proven to be the case. We'll see how much I like videoing while I'm playing it, which often is a burden. All right, let's send it up.